Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker. Today is the 6th day of April. It's 2 Sundays until Easter, and this is 2025. I've been working on parables, and I have a parable to share with you. This is one of the best known parables there are. This is from Luke, the 10th chapter. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, What is written in the law? What do you read there?" The lawyer answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he took him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." So for all of Lent, I'm going to focus on some of the most important teaching stories of Jesus. I don't think there could be a better way to prepare for the celebration of the resurrection. The parable for today is one of the most famous, the parable of the Good Samaritan. After the time of King David, we have to go back and learn something about how it came to be that there was enmity between the Samaritans and the Jews. After the time of King David and his son Solomon, the United Kingdom of Israel fell into civil war. The northern tribes pulled out of the unified Jewish nation, and thereafter the northern tribes were known as Israel, and the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin were known as Judah. The capital city of the north was Samaria, and the capital of Judea was Jerusalem, continued to be Jerusalem. David and Solomon had established the temple at Jerusalem as a kind of symbol of unity. Jerusalem was in the territory of the southern tribe of Judah. But with the northern tribes in Israel now separated after a bitter civil war, it wasn't possible for northerners to visit the temple at Jerusalem. So faced with either giving up their religion or adapting to changing politics, the northerners set up a temple that they had access to on top of another mountain in Israel at Shechem. If we fast forward 200 years after the death of Solomon, the now divided Jewish tribes faced a new threat in 720 BC. The threat was from for an invasion of the Assyrians into Jewish territory. The armies of Assyria invaded and took over the north, that is Israel, but they ran out of gas before they could occupy the south, that is Judah. It turns out that they were facing a much bigger threat from a rising Babylonian empire that was nipping at their heels. The people of the south claimed that they were saved from occupation by the Assyrians because they were morally superior to the Israelites in the north, in part because the northerners worshipped at the wrong temple. They worshipped at Shechem instead of at the true temple in Jerusalem. The Assyrian recipe for pacifying conquered peoples was to export part of the population to other places and to bring in new cultures from other occupied territories. And so the southerners in Judah had another reason to hate the Samaritans. The Samaritans, that is, the northerners, weren't pure Hebrews. They had interbred with these foreigners that the Assyrians had brought in, and so the Samaritans were not only heretics because they were worshipped at the wrong temple, they were half-breeds as well, not racially pure as the Jews were or claimed to be. So fast forward another 7 centuries to the time of Jesus, and the hatred, the prejudice against the Samaritans continues with the Jews. They still hated their half-breed cousins. What little was left of northern Israel was sandwiched between Judah in the south and Galilee, a relatively liberal Jewish area at the northern end of the Sea of Galilee. So there was Galilee at the north, Samaria in the middle, and Judah, where Jerusalem was, on the south. A self-respecting Jew traveling from Galilee in the north to Jerusalem in the south would rather leave Jewish territory entirely rather than set foot in Samaria. Jesus sometimes took the long way around Samaria to get to Jerusalem, and other times he traveled through Samaritan territory. Today, there are still Samaritans left. Not a lot of them, just several thousand, and they live in the northern part of the West Bank. We would not be able to distinguish them from Palestinians. So Jesus is teaching in the south, in Judah, and his audience is not 100% positive and friendly. Some people were trying to trip Jesus up, get him to say something that they could make something out of. So a lawyer stands up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your strength and your mind and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asks Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Now, there was a rule for everything in Judaism at this time, and the standard answer would be, your fellow Jew is your neighbor. Now, we have to understand that for a Jew at the time of Jesus, there were 3 categories of human beings. There were the Jews. These are my fellow Jews. These are the good guys. There are Samaritans. There are kind of half cousins. They're not really people we'd like to associate with very much. And the third category is dogs. That is, Gentiles. Anybody who's not a Samaritan and not a Jew is a dog. And you just don't associate with those dogs. So there's the good guys, the Jews, there's the half-breed heretical cousins of ours, and then there are the dogs. So the usual category for one's neighbor would be people who think and look and act like me. Jesus seldom missed an opportunity to poke criticism at the self-righteousness of the Jews of his time. In his parable about who was exhibiting the characteristics of being a neighbor, there are three people who encounter the unfortunate Jew who's been robbed and left half dead at the side of the road. The usual translation is that the first two who go by and don't help are a priest and a Levite. Clarence Jordan was a PhD in New Testament Greek, and he was a Southern civil rights advocate. And he was the author of a translation of the New Testament called the Cotton Patch Translation of the New Testament. And Clarence says in his translation that the first two to come by were a pastor and a Sunday school superintendent. Now, why did those two pass by the half-dead man? Well, if it's the priest and the Levite, it's because the cleanliness rules of the Jewish religion were preventing them from helping the person who was in need. Touching a dead body made you unclean, and the process of getting clean again was rigorous. And so these two, the priest and the Levite, too busy with church work to have time to be neighborly to a wounded traveler. And it's their righteousness rules that keep them from being the neighbor. If Clarence Jordan translated the priest and the Levite as a pastor and a Sunday school superintendent, both too busy being holy to be bothered with helping the victim of a brutal robbery, then guess who the Samaritan became in this translation, the Cotton Patch translation, into Southern American culture? The most distrusted, hated outcast of the time, a black man. The black man in the parable stops, puts the wounded man in the back of his old car, administers first aid, drops him off at a small hotel, pays for the wounded man's room, and sees that he gets medical care that he needs. Jesus' parable makes the hated, heretical, half-breed Samaritan the one who is the neighbor to the man who fell among thieves, not the priest, not the Levite. If Jesus were telling the story in our day and time, this is 2025 America, who would be the neighbor to the man who was in need? Would it be a representative of an opposing political party? Would it be a trans person with confusing pronouns? Would it be a Palestinian from Gaza? It's the kind of question Jesus would want to plant in our minds as we listen to this parable. Which of these three do you think was neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And the lawyer said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Now, God bless you. If you found value here, I'd appreciate it if you'd pass it along. And take care. See you soon.